7:05, Adelia, do you want to forge on ahead and brave the onslaught of doorbells?
Yeah, we'll just do that, and yeah, we'll get started. First of all, I want to say welcome to everybody, and a big thank you to, is Emmanuel, is he part of it? I wanted to say thank you to him.
He is back, and they're working on the audio, and I have an introduction for you, and just a couple of notes before I turn it over to you.
Okay,
So
well, I'll let you introduce, and then I'll do the thank you.
That'd be great. You can say what you'd like. The Zoomuse, a weekly 11 o'clock Pacific time Friday event, unless there's an Australian poet, in which case it's a different time. It was envisioned by Emmanuel Williams, who's in the house and working to figure out how to hear us. And it's facilitated by the Subud International Cultural Association, the world version of SICA. And very grateful for the SICA leadership for spearheading this and other much more activity in the village that they've created, the online village, as an alternative to Facebook, and kudos to them. So I'm Paul Nelson, and I'm on the team, I guess, of rotating hosts and facilitators. And our feature today is Adelia MacWilliam, who sometimes goes by Nicola. She is an emerging writer who recently completed her MFA in poetry at the University of Victoria. She wrote about a piece of land on Salt Spring Island that her family had occupied since 1905, and she learned that if you cast the mythic imagination across a piece of land that has always been part of your life, everything will out. She is co-founder of Cascadia Poetics Lab, and the URL for that, cascadiapoeticslab.ca. It produces annual poetry events in Cumberland when there's not a pandemic, and the monthly Red Tree reading series. She's published poems in Reckoning 3 and in the anthology Sweetwater, Poems for the Watershed. She divides her time between Cumberland and Galley Bay in Desolation Sound in British Columbia, Canada, and occasionally from Victoria. And we are recording this event, so if you don't want your picture seen on this, please click the no video option, and please welcome Adelia MacWilliam.
Thank you. It's all this. I can see the silent hands, so thank you very much. So yeah, a big thank you to Emmanuel Williams for putting this series together, and also I've seen Eugenia Stark has been part of it, and to Andrew Hall and Maimuna Duran, who helped me with the teaser, and of course many thanks to Paul for being the MC today. Yeah, he's responsible for making me laugh if I start crying. That's his job. he said if I cried too much, he'd edit it out and replace it with laughter. So there we go. But I'll hopefully not cry too much. So I'd like to start with a poem that is kind of the centerpiece of my thesis at UVic, where I did an MFA in writing. And it's a mythical journey back to the land that my great-grandparents bought in 1905, or occupied, as we could say. So it's a 40-acre parcel of land on Salt Spring Island near Beaver Point, with a shell beach that was the site of a Coast Salish village that has burial sites going back 7,000 years. And those sites are actually higher up where the shoreline used to be, which is so interesting. The shoreline has shifted in that many years. So this poem is called Country Noir, Details of the Passage. The joke goes like this: play a country and western song backwards and all you've lost, horses let loose, black dogs buried and cannonballs fired, will come back. What you really want as you approach Salt Spring Island near Beaver Point, starboard tack, sou'easter filling your sails, blue mountains. What you really want is to play the time song backwards on the Queen of Cowichan Ferry's loudspeaker, announcing details of the passage to Victoria, to Vancouver, 5 times a day. Bending pine needles, bird feathers, dragonfly wings, as it pulses through the throat of a tree frog. And waves from the ferry wake wash up and shuffle driftwood. You could hitch a ride back in time through the frog's entrails, past British gunboats, Spanish galleons, to when cedar bark-clad people in 40-foot dugout canoes navigated by starlight. But you're not yet naked enough to be a time traveler, can barely see what's here now, gorse-obscured cliff, curved eyelid of shell beach. You anchor at the cove entrance, row the Salish Sea's frigid water, walk up to the orchard, sour apples on gnarled branches, old man's beard in need of pruning, no garden now, 2 wooden armchairs on ragged crabgrass, face the cove. You meet only the caretaker's dog, small with bug eyes, soothed with touch. Approach the old cabin porch chair, rattan untwisting. Your great-grandmother's watercolors show cultivated flowers along the path. We're a postcard to Europe, to ancestors in fine hosiery, what it meant to have title. You recall that giant print on your grandmother's dining room wall, gray-eyed servant girls in fine hosiery, what it meant to have title. You recall that giant print on your grandmother's dining room wall, gray-eyed servant girls on a white sand beach, Dover, their day off, overcast sky, over large hands resting on black velveteen, laudanum of nostalgia. The property is collage of memory from above, ovals of shell, middens, squares of houses, winding trails, flattened, reduced, moved so far from signifier unless we dig, sort, claw, cursing at what's hidden in our vision, unless we cry a little and beg for time to open up again. For this, a photograph or two may help. The orchard where a cousin's wedding party happened, another cousin's marriage on a bluff beyond the beach, babies born from these unions, peach tang of skin when children are small, the coiled energy of family, the bluff where you camped in deer beds in the long grass under the choir bench of the dawn chorus. Ravens, coat, Canada geese, river otters, apostrophes in the current. Just another day in their neighborhood and you there quiet in your desire to see. And what if your entire sense of ease in the place where you came, dented with exhaustion, to have the conversations that took days to ferment, like the sweet wine you drank in companionable silliness, where you came when you needed to grieve, deaths in the family, and the ocean literally lifted the pain from your heart, swallowed it, and the tide continued to come in and go out again, implacable as always. What if this all turned out to be possible because of a great forgetting? You walked down the road near the creek toward the middens among the older Douglas firs, clam shells, little neck, butter, cockle, amid black greasy silt and crushed barnacle. There are burial sites up in the back near the creek where the shoreline used to be 7,000 years ago. You're walking toward the old starlight kept in the shelves. So this next poem is called What I'd Tell the Queen. So when I was doing the research around the property, I started studying the history of British Columbia, the real history, not the history I'd learned in high school. And a lot of things came out as things will. And I started looking at a little bit of the history of Victoria, which is where my family is mostly from. And I discovered that when they went to build the Parliament buildings in Victoria, they had to move the Songhees people so the Parliament buildings could be erected. And they moved them out to a more barren area, which eventually became a place where there were a group of shanty towns erected and where all the visiting nations would come and trade. And then there was a smallpox epidemic in 1862, so this is very topical, a smallpox epidemic in 1862, and things changed drastically. So just a bit of history there. At that time, Victoria is estimated to have had a population of between 2,500 and 5,000 non-Indigenous people. And in addition, it's estimated that there were 1,600 local First Nations who lived near Victoria, plus another 2,000 in encampments on the outskirts of town. So we've got the 1,600 Songhees who'd been sort of deported from where the Parliament buildings are now, and then another 2,000 in encampments from as far north as Alaska. So all along the coast. And there was a fateful day in March of that year, 1862, when the brother Jonathan sailed into the Victoria Harbor from San Francisco. And she carried a lot of boisterous gold seekers drawn to the Cariboo gold rush, but also one silent, lethal passenger. So for 24 hours, the passengers made the most of their time in Victoria, which included interactions with the First Nations encampment before they reboarded and departed. So a month later, the encampments and some of the First Nation communities were overwhelmed by smallpox. And the Victoria citizens were afraid they would be overrun by the virus. Okay, now they had a vaccine, and the local doctor, Dr. Helmken, vaccinated actually about 500 of the Songhees. But still, the citizens were afraid. So in response to that, the Commissioner of Police, Joseph Pemberton, began ordering those in the encampments to leave. And I grew up on Pemberton Road, so it was really amazing to me to discover today, when I did a bit more research, that I lived on the road named after the Commissioner of Police, who kicked out all the First Nations people from the encampments. And so a gunboat forced about 300 men and women and children to return to their northern homeland. And the gunboat was called Forward. It took a 15-day trip to Fort Rupert, towing 26 canoes full of natives. And so 20 canoes were Haida and 5 canoes of other Indians. So just to recap here, you can imagine what happened. And it's estimated prior to the 1862 smallpox epidemic, there are about 30,000 First Nations living on the coastline of BC. And post-epidemic, that number drops to 15,000. So, and of course, the devastation was not restricted to the coast. So this poem is called What I'd Tell the Queen. It was in outpost cities that the spatial order of imperial imaginings was rapidly realized. And that's from urbanist Jane Jacobs. So here goes my poem. If I were able to speak with Queen Victoria, I'd tell her that it wasn't far as the crow flies from the original Songhees village, where her statue stands now in front of our capital city's legislative buildings, to the blank, mysterious wild space across the inner harbor, strewn with rock and swamp, where the Songhees were forced to move. But dugout canoes had to be filled, packed cedar baskets, fishing nets, babies crying in the rain, ubiquitous rain, drops big as fingers, ceremonial masks for the winter dance, blanket wrapped in cedar boxes, staring out into a new darkness, tasting it with huge wooden tongues, while plank houses and totems were now decontextualized, inserted into European circuits of capital and culture. And I understand that she couldn't have been everywhere, so she couldn't have witnessed the alcohol, sweet and dirty as burnt sugar, ferried on dark nights to the relocated village before the smallpox outbreak in 1862, flat-bottomed boats so low in the water from their cargo, the gunnels were practically awash, no moon or stars in a muslin sky, thick-wristed stevedores steering by the light of Songhees campfires. It was so dark she couldn't have seen the boatmen spitting into the water, their tentacled gobs floating away, newly birthed jellyfish in the wake. And when the smallpox came, and all the visiting nations camping near the Songhees, Halkamelum, Nushalk, Haida, Gitchan, Chilcotin, Stikeen, New Chalmouth, Simshan, Squamish expelled, 26 dugout canoes towed out of the inner harbor by the British gunboat Forward, as far north as Prince Rupert, the shanty towns in flames behind them. And the people from those 26 canoes then infected their villages, at least half of them dying, allowing the spatial order of imperial imaginings to be realized in the ashes of the shanty fire and the rest of British Columbia. Dear Queen, don't tell me you didn't hear about this as you quietly sipped your Earl Grey tea. So this next poem is called Visiting the Cabin After It's Sold. So we're returning to the land. And this is the cabin that my great-grandparents lived in when they were on Salt Spring. They went between Salt Spring and Victoria. And the quote I have at the beginning is from G.C. Waldrop, who's a wonderful poet. And this kind of inspired part of the poem, you'll see. And the quote from him is, Sometimes we hide from the films the dead are showing because we are no longer sure which side they're on. So here goes the poem, Visiting the Cabin After It's Sold. You've walked in from the shore road beneath cathedral firs. Clam midden light, a breeze feathers your bare arms. Kingfisher racket in the cove. The August constant of quietly torn up cricket violin. There's a rabbit on the path ahead. Its whitetail bouncing like a song it's like a ball on a song sheet. Untwisting rattan on the chair on the front porch of the cabin. Old glass melting inside diamond panes. Your reflection jackknifed by shards of ocean and orchard. The wormhole door ajar, you go inside. Let your trespass bend your memories into ampersands inside the high-beamed room with a brick fireplace where your father's earnest was he flushed? I'll get through it. Proposal to your mother took place. The desolation you feel inside these rooms, their slow pour of decanted light, the overstuffed armchairs beseeching empty arms with their big floral print, the threadbare Persian carpet. To what extent does cartography bury the past? The map with curling edges left on the pine table by the new owner doesn't even show the cabin, the flight pattern of bees through the orchard, or the films the dead are showing, shuffling like a pack of cards. Your grandmother on the front porch, fine bone wrists beneath her sleeves, lifts her teacup from her knees. Your great-grandmother Maud at her easel beneath the leaning walnut tree with its thousands of woodpecker holes. The decades between her death and now, compressed like a brick of black PRT, her flower gardens flickering in black and white. Footage of you here too, skinny legs, a frayed one-piece bathing suit, shivering from swimming in the bay's frigid waters, your auntie saying pumpkin, your lips are blue. You want to wrap up all the films in whatever lies closest at hand, a cobweb shroud, shelf paper, a sleeping bag from up in the loft. You'll carry them with you to the hollow you're digging in the loose silt of no address. Warm as the wing pits of ravens after a night's roosting. Dog furs twist in it, vulnerable to the wind. You'll dig here with a teaspoon for the rest of your life. Whew. That one's got family and that gets harder. And at this point, Paul, you're allowed to sing your song about Adelia, just to.
This is the dawning of the age of Adelia, age of Adelia.
Thank you. I'm counting on Paul to, yeah, thank you. Fill the laughter where the tears were. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think laughter at that point would have been appropriate. And,
No.
And I'm grateful
anyway,
that you have
after
the
the
courage
poem.
to go into these things.
Yeah. Okay. Now, now I'd like to read a couple of poems of that were sort of Buddhist Taoist themed poems that were inspired by two men that I met at a poetics retreat that Paul had in Seattle 3 years ago. Who had both written books about Gary Snyder, who's been such a huge influence on poetry in the West Coast, and who is still at 80-something years old writing poems and you know, speaking, reading his poems. So the first poem is called Lost Lake, and this poem I just have to, I'm going to give just a plug for this anthology called Sweetwater, which is poems for the watershed. He edited by Yvonne Blomer, and this poem is part of that, and I feel very honored to be part of it. So Lost Lake was inspired by conversations I had with Gary Snyder's literary executor, Mark Gonderman, who Paul had invited to this event. And we were both staying at the Subin House in Seattle. And so we go for coffee in the morning and we talk. And so Mark, who wrote a book about Gary Snyder's Mountains and Rivers Without End, also had a forum which featured guest speakers, including the Dalai Lama, with whom he had the incident at the airport that's in the poem, And Lao Tzu's in there because Snyder's landscape poetry, as David Hinton writes, is indistinguishable from the Tao, where there's no duality between wild and civilized, which is really important because in our culture, we tend to have this huge separation that we're having difficulty bridging, you know, hence the West Coast being in flames today. So the cafe served as a backdrop for these conversations, and I wrote it as a late kind of, I won't go on too much longer, this is from the blurb in the book, but experiencing a fracture of identity, a kind of psychogenic fugue. And it felt like I was experiencing no duality, that several worlds were overlapping. Because I was in the cafe with Mark having conversations about Snyder, and he's considered to be, by David Hinton, the third great echo poet following Jefferson Rexroth. So it was kind of like well, amazing conversations. So here goes the poem. So Lost Lake, for which I dedicated to Mark. So it's a retro bar and grill now in Seattle, where the light is a woman ducking into a doorway between the calligraphy of cars on Capitol Hill, as seen from above by a hawk, not far from the Elliott Bay bookstore. Yes, it's a bar and grill, open 24/7 now, where steelhead trout ghost by damply unseen behind the whiskey and gin, and the cougar on the shelf above the window has a plastic grin. Please wait to be seated in Lost Lake, where all the wildernesses meet. You can look for Yoko Ono's tiny yes on the ceiling, just visible through a magnifying glass. Lao Tzu will be there wearing a baseball cap, also saying yes, while Gary Snyder's Mountains and Rivers Without End opens its pages in a booth in the back, unanswered koans near the ketchup, and the girls at the next table joke about last night's escapades on the D train. We'll meet in the back booth and you'll tell me the story of your first meeting with the Dalai Lama, how your mala broke, beads peppering the airport floor. His Holiness helped you pick them up. And when you asked him what this meant, he told you scattered blessings, which I thought was really sweet. So the other man I met who inspired a poem at this retreat is Jason Worth. He's actually Dr. Jason Worth. He's a professor of philosophy at Seattle. He's written books about Schelling and Nietzsche, and also a book called Mountains, Rivers, and the Great Earth, reading Gary Snyder and Dogen in an age of ecological crisis, which I highly recommend. So after reading that book, which he sweetly gave to me, I wrote this poem, which is called The Mountains See Me. And the quote from Jason here, which I loved, was, the great earth itself is a sutra, and to read it is to die to oneself and enter the backcountry living and thinking in its wild processes. So sutra, just, we kind of know what it is, but I, of course, had to look it up again. And in Sanskrit, sutra means note or sacred thread or a code, and often used in chanting and meditation. And then backcountry is associated in Buddhism with wilderness, yes, but also with the backcountry of the mind, with its levels of being in the unconscious. So I love to think about, you know, being out in the wilderness. I'm also out in the backcountry of my mind at the same time. There's no duality there. So the poem is about the mountains that I row out to every day when my partner and I are up in Desolation Sound. And I really feel like they are living beings, entities, if you will. And this really fits with Buddhist thought. So here goes. So the mountains see me. Blue-green mountains, stone warriors, nostrils streaming, mist scarves over massive shoulders. Walked out of the backcountry, row after row, to the head of the sound. Fire ticking in lava bones, ready to, as Gary Snyder says, put some coins in the parking meter and head to the 7-Eleven. But first, a pause to look across the sea. Open water cups my rowboat. I feel the mountains tilt the iris blue film of my life from its canister to view it in their movie house. A skip of a rock on a crater lake in their no prime being. What's left afterwards? My tiny white mouse bones in their scat. 2. In their high-up tea shacks, Chinese sages painted mountain scenes onto fine white silk, flicked fort lightning out of heaven's chasm, pulled spirits up from gullies and crags. Rujan, Dogen's teachers, emptied, became his own brush. His silk scroll of a mountain season left a residue of pine gum in bodhisattvas' hearts. I can't be Dogen's brush. An alphabet is all I have. Instead, I'll pour the mountain's light at dusk into an extended ellipsis and hold it there, tapping its sides while it cools. 3. Dogen would say that the mother of these mountains is not fire, but emptiness itself. A nothing that could make 10,000 things and still be nothing. All that is before me, conifers, igneous rock, lizards tumbling in dusty scree above the Krumholtz, has emptiness at the center. I want to invite the mountains to come back to the cabin with me, drink tea, talk about the great earth, the ring of fire, earth's first gear grind of tectonic plates, what they think of us hungry ghosts burning up the world. But this is not the conversation we would have. These mountains would take me into their mouth, their unscrolling mouth. So, staying with that part of the world.
We're at 23 minutes, just to let you know.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was going to ask you. So, staying at that part of the world. This poem is about an oyster farmer I met last summer in Theodosia Inlet, which is very close to where we are, kind of around and back behind the peninsula that Galley Bay is on. And it's a man named Hugh, a friend of my partner Gary's, and he's been oyster farming for many years, and I was really struck by his story. So this poem is called Oyster Farmer, Theodosia Inlet. 30 years ago, October grizzlies, the sudden humped shoulders of them, one behind every bush, when chum salmon spawn, red threshed in the mouth of the inlet, rainfall from the mountains swirling round your gumboots when you first stood there amazed, letting the genus loci of the land take you in. You could say you were tricked into staying by end of the trail wolf light, cantering lightly out of the Salal and Oregon grape. And by the fog that swirls soundlessly amidst firs, water's idea of thought, each wedge of trees inhabited by a darkening silhouette as it drifts in. 1,000-year-old ghosts of the Sliammon stepping back one by one into the fog's gray office buildings. And the incessant winter rains, water's idea of interrogation, to which the answers are always yes, because you had no choice. Oystergur stacked in piles in the bush, behind, beside, around the house, blue barrels, black boys, stacks of coiled rope, rusting boat engine parts, tangled nets, useful flotsam, detritus, washed up in the beach, an abandoned float house resembling a beached rock cod high up on the shore rocks. This habitual stockpiling of fortification against your life before this, which trailed behind you for years, a ball on a memory string, gradually shrinking as your head became a library of tides. And you taught yourself how to align with the lungs of the Milky Way, tilting above the inlet. Let those ephemeral, stardusted organs breathe with you. And then finally, oyster spawn from your shell-encrusted trays began to trickle white milk into the inlet. There. So how are we doing, Paul? Am I at my, that's it?
25 minutes, 25.
I'll do one more.
Okay.
One more. This is another rowing poem. This is kind of my theme. I rowed into places, obviously. So this is, again, rowing into land that has mythic impact. This summer we went up on a sailboat on Gary's sailboat up into Brem River in Toba Inlet, and anchored outside there. And this was my first encounter with grizzlies. So really something. And we rowed into the river. We had to wait till the tide was high to try and row into the river a bit. and it turned out to be evening, and it was quite epic. I went back the next morning too, but in the poem it's kind of one. Okay. Toba Inlet, grizzly territory. July evening, you row into the mouth of the Brim River, buoyed along by a flood tide. Night circles down from steep mountainsides, lands with careless, open-fingered wings in the long grass. It has a turkey vulture's head, rosy infrared. On the mountain's shoulders, encampments of light drown in tinted mist. On the other side of the bay near the shore, another encampment beside a small waterfall that pours a torrent of silver lightning down a slick, wet cliff. In it, 2 huge spools, a sea can, 2 feller buncher cabs, coils of wire rope. No sign of the clahoose anywhere. You enter a tunnel, billowy with foliage, thick with birdsong. Ahead, the river courses toward you, shoulders past trees and boulders, fierce, full of desire. You tried to hold the entire river in your mind, but it veers away as though pushed by a magnetic force, foreign to you. You thought of the Kwakil story of the woman out berry picking. She stepped in some bear dung, cursed the bear's wide anus, never made it home. You must not curse anything here. You are maybe only a tourist, a yawl waiting for you offshore with its captain sails furled, but that doesn't make you immune. Can you leave that story behind? Let it collect like foam at the tide line along with the bladder rack? It keeps changing anyway. Family holiday, you are 10 years old, visiting your grandparents' ranch house in the Okanagan. Sprinklers flick spray into nut trees in the orchard near the lake. Your grandfather drinks whiskey every night, scent of tar and citrus from his glass. His breath, smoke from his Marlboros. You lie in the cougar skin rug near his feet, tap, tap, tapping at the cougar's glass eyes. Ice clinks. The tide of liquor rises, engulfs the adults in currents of burnt umber laughter that crystallize overhead like sap. Then the easing, the ebbing, the hunting dogs tied up, through the living room windows, glowing behind the apple trees. The lake is a field of beaten copper, pianissimo on the glass eyes. You of the nation that scarred the river, jammed it with logs and silt, gouging out crumbling caverns from its swaying sides so men could sit with calculators, wrapped, collecting. You would have a story like that, you with that nervous tap tap. Let that story go too. In this one, you're in a 14-foot-long double-ended rowboat. The oars reach out behind you, pull the boat forward. You ride the river like you rode the swaying back of a bear, listening backwards into the drumming in that shamanic journey you made, to retrieve fragments of your soul that had been left, hooked like rugs into the past. Tree of life rugs, tapestries, twisted rags. Your father at sea when you were young, the Korean War smoldering in him like a mattress fire. He sensed it on watch on the bridge of his ship after hours of gazing across the sea at night, like staring into de Kooning's excavation, an ambiguous space, neither flat nor deep. Somber grays intersected by a curling wake. Click of his silver lighter as he lit his de Maurier, a clutching emptiness, a rueful sourness ticking in his blood. You shut the door of your bedroom, quietly arranged dominoes into grazing herds on the little round carpet. The blonde Jesus in your child's Bible with all the pictures said, suffer the little children. And later, so much later, the bear tells you B plus R makes bear. When a mystic contemplates the universe, mirabilia, let that go too. The flood tide meeting the river between lush banks as a dinosaur back. Above it, deeper hued mountain ridges fade to ultramarine, lace edged by mist. Birds sing bone-fluted songs. Dragonflies tattoo the air. You breathe in green air with each stroke. You've been whittled down by loss like a stick. The sky is a dark courtyard in the eye of the grizzly. You don't know what will speak for you.
I think it's fair enough for everybody to unmute themselves and give you a real
Wonderful.
hand of blood. There you go.
Thank you.
Marvelous. Wonderful, Adelia.
Tell us that line again. You've been whittled down by loss like a stick. Is that how it went?
Yeah. But in that comes renewal, right? It's all
Or,
entering.
or a good weight loss plan. I would like to open it up to comments, questions for anyone who would like to jump in. You know, I'm an interviewer, so I'm prepared with a whole swath of questions, but I would like to open it up to others to speak. Richard, go ahead. And then
Yeah,
Susila
well,
Bryant.
it always shows up, my name shows up as Richard because of my email address, but I have a more recent Sioux name of Theo or Theodore, just so everybody knows who doesn't know.
I'm going to rename you then.
Yes. Oh, okay. If you can do that.
How's
Yeah,
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to comment. Well, I have several comments. The first one is I notice that almost every one of your poems is in the second person. It wasn't always clear to me who the you was. It seems like in most of them it was you yourself. But I'm particularly interested in the third poem, which moved me to tears.
Oh, which was the third one again? Oh,
Visiting the cabin after it's sold.
The cabin.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm just curious. It moved you to tears. Why? Just curious.
I wish I could remember more of
Yeah.
what it said, but it was just so much memory and maybe loss too.
Uh-huh.
And personal mythology.
Yeah,
Yes.
I wish I could remember more. These go by so fast. And I want to comment further that you have a tremendous gift of imagery and the images go by so fast. And it's a little hard for me to keep up. And I'm going to make a request here. I don't know if you, well, it will be up to you whether to fulfill it. If you could give me or us your email address, I would like to send you my email address so that you could send me copies of your poems in some form or other. Or at least
You know, we
read-
can use the Theo. We can use the chat function. If you click on chat at the bottom of your screen, on the right side of your screen, it'll pop up a little box where you can type in your email address. And Adelia, you're welcome to do that if you feel good about that. And that was a great question about second person. I don't think you did answer that, but what do you think about that, Adelia?
There are several reasons for using the second person. Did you get that? I just put it requires a kind of distancing from self when you say you. And I think what I'm trying to write about is this may sound a bit BS-y here, but kind of a universal you, going in and encountering these things. And I also like to think that the I, which is the you in any of the poems, is being transformed in the writing of the poem and becoming something different all the time. There is, some people react differently to the you. I find when I write with the you that it helps me see what I'm doing, what I'm encountering, the landscape that I'm entering into, and keeps me from going too inside, too solipsistic. It makes me more external. Mm-hmm. So that's how it functions for me. And yeah, so that's why I often say you. But I know some people respond to it as kind of strident, so it's
no, I like it, but occasionally I think the you wasn't you, it was someone else. Maybe in that third poem, or maybe in, was that the one maybe where I felt it was your mother? Maybe you meant by you, or your.
These poems is me always. It's all me. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think there's a single poem where it's anybody else. They're all me.
Well, some of the imagery seemed to go so far back. I thought you can't be that old. It seemed like there were allusions there to the 20s and the 30s and.
Oh yeah, no, not that old.
No, I know.
I guess I think it'll become clearer, Theo, when I send you the poems.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'll just ask people, because I'm sending these poems out for publication. A couple of. I read.
That
Have
was
them?
my question.
Yeah. So I think I have to, I can share them, but I have to ask for people to
Keep
not
them
share
to
them.
themselves. Yeah. And we're recording this. So inshallah, it'll be there for people to review and go more slowly and enjoy at their pleasure. Susila Wanti had her hand up, and then Pamela did.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Paul. Yes, Adelia, bravo. I would like to say, you know about Colville, Colville? Do you know?
Alex Colville, the artist?
No,
Um,
Colville was the previous name for Nanaimo.
no.
And
Cold.
yeah, so
See-
I'm talking about in the West Midlands of the UK, my ancestors left there and came to Colville before it was called Nanaimo in the 1850s. That's how long my family's been in British Columbia. And one of my father's great uncles, called Cornelius, was a person of the cloth in the Church of England. So the thing that struck me the most, well, all your work to me is resonating with nature and your place in the land, but also your ancestors and so forth. But this, what I would say to the Queen poem really touched me because of my family connection and also because of their history as colonials coming either as clergy or teachers or miners into the Vancouver Island. So I just wanted to say to you that what it stirred up for me was the whole situation about colonialism in 2020 right now, and the toppling of statues everywhere, and all the racism that I learned being raised in the colonies. And I've been praying for that to be lifted. But at the same time, I love the English language. I love standard English. And when I lived in England in the 1990s, it was the BBC had a program called Jenny Murray's Women's Hour, and they and there was a proposal to teach standard English as a second language, which I heartily endorsed. And I love your use of English and the connection with nature here, because I was born and raised in the North Pacific and in Cane Island. I was raised not in Cane Island, but I was raised in Prince George from the year of 1, but born there. So I applaud your language, the way you bring in the person you are and your experiences and being in the nature of the Northwest. Thank you very much. Bravo.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Susila
think
Wanti,
all I have is the English language. Yeah.
Susila Wanti will be featured next week here at Zoomuse, so 11 o'clock next Friday, the 18th. Pamela Galloway, well, that was a compliment more than a question or a statement. So moving on to Pamela Galloway.
Thank you, Paul. Well, Adelia, first of all, I hope you remember me from coming to read at Red Tree a few years ago.
I don't see your, oh, there you are. Yep, there you are. Yes, I do. Yeah, I remember emailing you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for sending me this invitation. And thank you so much for that wonderful reading. And I just want to say I agree with everything that Theo has said and Susila has said. And I just loved these long poems. I love that you've gone into your subject and, you know, written these long poems, which are just marvelous, and the imagery is brilliant. I just love it. I just wanted to say that for me, what the you does for me is that I was pretty aware as I was listening to you that the you was you, the you was I. But what the you does for me, it brings me with you. So when you went into that cabin and you were speaking of you, I was with you. So it's like it's you, meaning I, but it's also the you, the reader. It brings me in. I liked it. I really, really liked that. And your imagery is absolutely brilliant. And my question for you is, are you putting these in? You were saying you were sending them out for publication, but is that in a book form, or are you sending them out to journals, or what are you doing at this point in terms of publication? Because these poems should be published in a book, I think.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal. At the moment, I'm sending them out to publications so I can get enough street cred to then approach a publishing firm. So, and I'm getting more encouraging rejection letters saying, oh, we liked it. It doesn't fit with our...
I'm not sure if it was you that sent me the invitation, whether you have my email address, but I do. You do have my email address. Yeah. Okay. So I will be able to get to you, and I'll give you some ideas of maybe where you could send your poems. Yeah. I just want to quickly say to Susila, I am in England right now. I've actually left BC about 18 months ago, and I'm living in Northern England. And so I just want to let you know, Susila, that your comments about, you know, England and your memories of it in the 90s and everything totally relate to that, because I'm here right now.
Adelia, there's been a couple of threads in here, and one question or subject, should you care to address it, is some of the issues that you've encountered in academia and the publishing community regarding your choice of content. So you started off by telling us country noir and giving us the story of your family's land that had been between 1905 and just a few years ago, your family's land on occupied territory. And your writing about this got you into a little difficulty in academia. And it alludes to racism in Canada and to the whole anti-colonialist movement, which, as Susila noted, is really coming alive now. Do you care to talk about that at all?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. It was painful at the time. But, in the first poem that I read, there was a section that I've deleted that talks about a burial site that was discovered when a road was widened, and it was a woman in a root ball, and who was just the skeleton. This particular set of bones is about 2,000 years old, and it's a woman buried with her child, sort of curled around, and the root ball was in the center of it, and it really moved me. And I started addressing a series of poems to this woman, whoever she had been, 2,000 years previous, and imagining how she was killed because she had died young, and what her life must have been. And I really looked into Coast Salish villages, because there was a village there at the land, and it was an amazing journey for me. And that comprised about a third of my thesis, actually. And my thesis advisor, Tim Lilburn, who's just a lovely, amazing man, I recommend to everybody that you read his work. He's incredible. Went to a conference at a First Nations University. I believe it's called First Nations University in Saskatchewan. We'd have to check. And he came back from that conference and he said, the mood has really changed. First Nations people are feeling really angry these days, and you have to understand they're very tired of white people writing about their bones. And he suggested I read a book by an anthropologist. I can post the name of that book later. It's not coming to me at the moment. But so I read the book about the history of anthropologists and their relationship with First Nations people in North America, and it's been really fraught. And I came to understand that at this time in Canada, these were not poems that I, as a white person, could be publishing. What Tim basically said was you could get in trouble, and by extension, the writing department at UVic would also get in a lot of trouble, and him as well as my thesis advisor. So I pulled those out of my thesis, and they're now called the Forbidden Poems. And I would like it if there was a time. I mean, for me, I was just an innocent and very respectful in these poems, of course. But these times are fraught. And I'm a representative of this settler culture that's come. I mean, what I want to say about the poem I wrote about the expulsion of all the people from the camps in 1962, my great-grandfather arrived the year after that, and he became a member of the, member of the legislature, and was also a judge. And he might have been part of that expulsion, but thank heavens he came the year after. But I spent 24 hours wondering if he was part of that and didn't get much sleep. So there is, you know, we do carry kind of a legacy of guilt or responsibility, or there's a lot of different ways to deal with the very complicated emotions that arise from being part of that. So I had to understand that I am a representative of those people. And though I felt, you know, very close to the spirits on the land because I could feel their presence. When we were out camping, I just felt like they were always there. My cousin has a story of camping on the land near those burial sites and waking up, and he said, you can't mention my name in this, waking up and hearing drums and seeing the water in the bay kind of dancing in rhythm to the drums, and he was terrified and ran back down the road. It's a 40-acre parcel, so lots of room, to the cabin where his family were terrified. So they very much have a presence on that land to this day. So I felt kind of a kinship with them, to be honest. But given who I am, what I represent, writing about those poems at the moment is not kosher. And, you know, maybe that will change. I haven't thrown the poems away. But I don't know, if I had answered your question, Paul. It's kind of a long-winded story. But
well, it's the answer we'll have for today. And, you know, I mean, you've put your email address there into the chat room. So if anybody wants it, they can have it. And I think this might be a good time to wrap up, unless I see anybody. Yes, I see nodding heads of Leonard Dixon and others. So first of all, this was a really stellar Zoomuse, fantastic. And I'm grateful for my super brothers and sisters around the world to tune in today in this way. And I'm grateful for Emmanuel for inventing this, and SICA International for producing it and moving it along. And Adelia, just for all the way you've spent your energy. That time we first met, thanks to a SICA international grant that allowed me to go up to Canada and do outreach to try and connect Subud and poetry. Here we are today, and the writing you've done in that 5 or 6 years is just magnificent. And I'm so grateful to know you, and so grateful for that reading and that slice of your life and your experience and your imagination and your deep connection and care for the land and the creatures who live on it. So thanks.
yeah, thank you, Paul. Paul's been integral to what's happened over the last few years. So I think he knows, but I could say more, but I know we have to wrap up. But thank you to everybody who attended. I appreciate you being here. And
it's wonderful, Adelia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Wonderful.